we start with the very beginning, which is that for every competition, there is, how to say that, very big emotional investment, right? So emotional investment, which what I'm saying is that you have to stay focus on we call it, keep the eyes on the prize, right? So focus on the purpose, focus on the goal, and it might take a lot, right? So I have clients in competition that are for 1 year in this tension of the competition that is suspended or postponed on this, on that, right? So when you enter such a situation, stay in advance with that, how to say, consideration in mind that it will take time. Makes sense? So do not suspend your life and going for the competition. Try to accommodate the competition into your life, right? I was having just before you a session with a client, and obviously she is in a competition. And what we decided is that during the lunch break, she will do the preparation for the MCQ, and in the evening, she will do the preparation for the written. Makes sense? So this is and then in the weekend, she will do the verbal, numerical, and abstract. You see, so for each one of you, think about how you are going to integrate the preparation into your professional and private family life, because it's a long-term investment, right? So you cannot just go kind of running, makes sense, because you will not get to the end of it. So you have to have a good pacing, and with that pacing you go as long as it takes. You see what I mean? Do not.
We can consider close this one because we.
So do not get how to say that, desperate or running like you say your life depends on it, right? It's very important emotionally, mentally, to stay with that point. Then. So coming back to what can I do to help you, to support you? First of all, like, to know where you, probably some of you will know me, some already know what I'm doing, but just to be clear, I'm accompanying my clients in their professional life for the last 30 years and 25 years with the contracts with the European institutions, which means that I am accompanying clients in the European institutions for the last 25 years. And how do I accompany my clients? Exactly how I will, explain to you that I accompany you. So number one is whenever they decided to go for a competition or selection process, then we start by rewriting the documents for application. So we are talking about either and the CV. We are talking about the 4 motivational questions that you have in the EPSO application. You know what I'm talking about. If you are from this environment, you know the famous 4 motivational questions of the EPSO application. We talk about a motivation letter. If you go for example, a job in the another sector or another institution, or you're going for an agency, you might not need to have the 4 questions, but you might need to have a motivation letter. Or if you go for other institutions like UN or World Bank or so, then you have documents that are similar to application forms, right? So think about whatever documents you have to introduce to apply for a competition or selection process, then we write them together, which is obviously, more reassuring than you doing the way you think, because in theory, I have seen a lot of them, so I kind of have a very good feeling of what is the good quality document that you have to apply with. So this is the first stage, right? Application. Now, I want to clarify here that I do not do every time another document, right? So I'm not doing with you a CV for this competition, and in 1 month, another CV for another competition, and so on and so forth. No, your CV is one. And in that CV, we put everything that we think is reasonable, relevant, useful for your future employer to see. And obviously, this is a decision that we will take together. So it will be one CV. And then in the same way, will be one motivational letter or motivational whatever documents, obviously apart from the interest for the job. Makes sense? So if today you apply for a GRC job, then our motivation for the GRC will be phrased in a different manner than if tomorrow you apply for the agency. Makes sense? Because in one way to do research, in the other way you do implementation of the policy, and in another way we will phrase the motivation for the commission or RTD, for example, where you create the policy. Makes sense? So think about that. This is the only point that will be different, whilst the rest of the motivation letter, where we speak about you, will be the same. Makes sense? So it's important to have that in mind, that the documents are the same, except a very minimal difference, which is the motivation for the job. Why? Because I say to my clients, imagine that you send one CV for the GRC, another CV for an agency, another CV for RTD, and so on and so forth. And then at a certain point, an HR will find 3 your CVs different on the desk. It will be quite embarrassing, right, to have 3 different CVs when you are one person. So because of that, I do one CV where I do the best I can with my client, obviously, to be relevant, but that is. So then, and this CV you will upload in your CISPER, in your syslog, in your EPSO profile, wherever, in your LinkedIn profile, and so on and so forth. So that's one, your CV. And then as a consequence, we create the application forms. Make sense? So this is the first thing that we could do together. Now, I would stop every time. Do you have questions? Do you want clarifications before I move to the next? No? Yes? Looks that everything is clear. Good. Okay, so this was the first step. Now, the second step, we entered the famous test, right? And I will start with the CBT test. Why? Because the CBT is the one, right? So we understand that it's verbal, numerical, and abstract, right? We are talking about computer-based tests. And the first thing, but obviously they are all computer-based, but this is the verbal, numerical, and abstract. Now, the point with this test is that you will have it, I would say, quite late, like starting obviously with the ASTs, and then you go until what, AD 9, 10, I think that up to their level, you still have to do the CBTs, verbal, numerical, and abstract. So start doing it because you will not escape it. Makes sense. So this is a compulsory test throughout the selection processes, at least in the EPSO, in the institutions. So because of that, start doing it, you cannot avoid. Now, what is the point of the verbal, numerical, and abstract is that at the end of the day, it's like 12 years old school level, right? So don't make such a fuss out of it. It's not so difficult. It's just that, yes, it's practice. It's something that you don't do or you didn't do. So once you get the good method, right? And this is what I propose in my monthly master classes. Once you have a good method, then do the practice. The practice will make you performant, right? So, and that's why, as I said, my client, before this session, we decided that she will do her verbal American abstract in the weekend, 4 times in the weekend, I mean 4 times 4 exams, and that will be quite a good, reasonable quantity. Now, obviously, that depends on the level you have, because what I say to my clients, you should be able to get at home about 7, 8 over 10 as level, right? So that when you are in a condition of exam stressed, you could get down to 6 over 10, but you do not risk to fall under 5 over 10, right? So if at home you do 6 over 10, is kind of very risky that in the exam you will fall under 5. Makes sense? But if you are at 7, 8, then you might be reassured that you will stay over 5. Makes sense? Which is the necessary to pass, the passing mark. So what I would say, if we do the CBT methods in a masterclass, then you start the practice. And hopefully you stay on 7, 8 throughout your practice at home, which means that in the exam, you are secured, let's say, to have a 6. Why not 7? But let's say you are secure that you have a 6. You are secure that you will not fall under 5. So this is to talk about the verbal, numerical, and abstract. And then when I do the masterclass, then I mention about how to practice, you know, the frequency, the test, how we say, the databases from which you practice, and a lot of other characteristics on how to practice to get, let's say, a good a good result, because it's like a securing result. Makes sense. Now, I finish with this. I'm going for the MCQ. The MCQ is multiple choice questions, right, in the domain of competence. And when we are talking about this, we are thinking about obviously expert competitions, but as well internal competitions, because in the internal competition, you need to do the revision of the European policies. Whilst in the expert competition, even though you are the expert, you are supposed to revise your domain of expertise. Makes sense? So here, when I do the session on the revision for the MCQ, I think about an MCQ that you will have for the expert competition. And I think about the presentation of the EU policies that you have to do in the internal competition, right? So we are talking about the same difficulty, which is a test to verify your knowledge in the field. Now, in order to, I say, ensure as much as you can knowledge in the field, then obviously it's not enough to read, but you have to do some templates, some structures in which you write your, how I say, knowledge, or you take notes of your knowledge. So then you could go again through it and revise and revise and revise. Makes sense? It's a question of learning. Even though, obviously, if you say, well, I'm a specialist in the domain, yes, but you don't know the domain is always, whatever domain we take is huge, right? So you have to revise it. And then once you revise it, you have to repeat it. So for example, with my client, I will see Paola, write me some examples of these short questions, and then I will comment on that, right? What do you mean by, could you just write it down? Like, I don't hear you. So I don't know what's happening with your, yeah, probably this. So you were saying? Good. So let me continue this. So what I was saying is that the revision has to be short and superficial, right? I quote here one of my clients, and she was the speechwriter for Juncker. And when I was preparing her for the internal competition, right? And she used to say, my knowledge is like the sea, 1 millimeter deep, right? So this is the preparation for the MCQ, right? It's superficial preparation, but very large to cover all the domain, because the domain will be large per se. You see, so the point is, and this is what we are going to analyze. Okay, so if it's just that, we have no idea for the moment. We have to see more, because in any case, if I go to my, how to say, template for the revision of the MCQ, this is the way I'm doing. So very superficial knowledge covering the whole domain. Makes sense? So this is what I was just doing before the session, is to do examples of these templates, right, where you have the ability to respond very short questions, like, for example, why do we have such a research policy? You see, that's an example of a short question. So might be that we could serve it as in an MCQ, where I give options, or I could just give the question and then you have to fill in without any suggestions. My thought is that this option with short questions without options, it's easier for them. So I could imagine that they could do that because it's easier, but I'm not able to comment for the moment. I have to dig more on that. So just coming back to the MCQ, keep in mind that you have to cover a lot, but stay superficial. Do not go deep. So this was the point with my client, that she said, you know, the problem I had is that I started to read and I started to go on this website, another website, and this and that, and then I found myself with a template of 2-3 pages per policy. I say, good Lord, you're supposed to do 60 these templates, right? How do you do 60 templates of 2 pages? No, it is, how we say, out of proportion with the preparation for such a revision. So my thought, and this is what I've done with her, is to create a template of half page, 3/4 of a page, and every policy has to enter this template. You see, so this is the way that we will do it on the masterclass for the revision, in order to prepare the MCQ, or in order to prepare the presentation of the policies that are done normally in the internal competition. So this is number 2. Number 3 is the written test. Now, here we have to do a very clear distinction between 2 categories, right? One category, and the distinction is done according to the evaluation criteria. So, evaluation criteria can be either communication plus knowledge. And the second evaluation criteria is only communication. Make sense? So whenever you look at the written test, I would say, don't look at the title because it's quite confusing, because they are all written tests, but look at the evaluation criteria that you find in the notice. So the evaluation criteria, if it's communication plus knowledge, then it means that you have to revise the substance, because you have to go in that test with knowledge, so that you can elaborate solutions and options and actions and so on, coming from your own knowledge. Makes sense what I'm saying? So, for example, we had a competition in Schengen about 2 years ago, or something like that, and was written test in the domain of competence, right? So they had to go with the knowledge, because imagine that they got 2 documents, which were the Schengen regulation and the Schengen guidelines, 100 pages. Now, imagine that you have a written test in which you have 100 pages document on the spot, not in advance. So on the spot, they got the 100 pages. Now, you can only handle the 100 pages in your exam of 90 minutes if you have knowledge on the documents, right? So what you have to have in mind that when they write communication plus knowledge, then you have to come with the knowledge. And only when you come to with the knowledge, then you could handle the file, because it might be that the file is either very heavy or very complicated, right? So I'm talking about the Schengen, I'm talking about an AD5 law, where they got a regulation plus a judgment from the Court of Justice, you see? So again, we are talking about 50 pages of documents. So either you have the knowledge, you see, or you cannot consume that 50 pages in the situation of the exam and then think and then give a response, right? So these are the exams where the written is evaluated with communication plus knowledge, okay? Good. So now the other side, we have the written that are evaluated only with communication. Makes sense? So now, if it's only communication, it means that at the end of the day, doesn't matter the subject, or doesn't matter the domain of competence. Makes sense what I'm saying? Because the evaluation is on communication. So then you could have, let's say, a typical case study that they have done for 20 years, 20 more, where you go for, what was that, a competition in economics, I think last year, and the case study was coming from fisheries. Typical case study, right, that is evaluated with communication skills. Makes sense? No knowledge in the field. Or you could have a written, like they have done for the transport last month, where again, how would say, the domain was kind of transport, kind of intelligent city. Was that Anastasios, right? Intelligent cities or intelligent transport and sustainable and something like that, right? But you didn't need to bring knowledge. Make sense? Because you could work the document through, let's call it, your intelligence alone, right? Not technical knowledge. Huh? Do you agree with me, Tassos? Yeah. You see? So that is, they call it written test, No, it's a case study, right? In the sense that it's evaluated through communication skills. And then they have another, written test. The last one they introduced for the assistants, where you will be in the policy, European policies, free essay, right? But again, as we assess only communication skills, it's very similar again to the case study. In any case, keep in mind that you have 3 here written that will be evaluated on the communication skills. So it's almost then, I would say, sleep well the night before, be smart, and then you process whatever file you get here. Whilst on the first, where it's communication plus knowledge, then it's not enough to sleep well and be smart. Then you have to have the knowledge. You see the difference? So these are the 2 things that we are talking about in the written. Now, once you have done the 3, which is the CBT, which means verbal, numerical, and abstract, the MCQ, which means the multiple choice question, then and then you have the written. Okay, so we have done the 3. Then you, in theory, you are on a reserve list, and then you have to go for the next. Now, what I'm saying is that this is not necessary in all the institutions. So that's why I continue with other, let's say, preparation, other master classes, which is oral presentation. Now, in the internal competitions, you have oral presentation on the policies. Good. So if you have done the revision for the MCQ, then you are done. And if not, you could have oral presentations on the file. And this happens sometimes in the Court of Justice, or they happen for the translators, right? They receive a file and they do presentations based on the file. So this is one test. And then we could still have interviews. And I'm doing the interviews and for the internal competitions and for interviews in the agency, for example, or in other institutions. And for some of the institutions, they have situational competence-based interview, right? A situational judgment interview. And then again, I do this preparation when my clients have to face it, like in some of the institutions. I think that lately was the parliament competitions. And so with that, I think we got to the end of it. And if there is no more questions, what I would say, invite you to check the website, because you will have the master classes organized for per month, right? So once a month, I give the list of the master classes, and you can apply. And if there is an urgency, like you have an interview, you have an exam, you have something that is, let's say, not planned in advance, then obviously you could call me, and then we go immediately on a individual session in order to prepare you for, which is what I will have just after this. I have a director who goes for a director general position, and he's called in 3 days in an interview. So I have to jump to prepare him for this interview. Obviously, he was not aware. He just got called, and then I said, yes, obviously, I could accompany you in preparation this interview. And you could imagine that either you are an AST1 or you are an AD16, when you are in an interview, it's the same amount of stress. So just keep in mind that you're not the only ones, and I'm here to help whenever you need it.